Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SimplySada series, episode 22. I'm here with my friend Johannes, and I'll just introduce us both. So I'm Eli Mydlarz, the head of engineering for SadaPay. And Johannes, do you want to introduce as well?
Yeah, I'm Johannes. I'm a chapter lead at SHARE NOW, which is a mobility company in Germany and Europe.
Cool, man. And we wanted to talk about full stack engineering together. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately because we just launched our full stack engineer role at SadaPay. So we had like a blog post about it, and we have a job listing on our website now. And so I'm getting a lot of questions from people and a lot of discussion about what full stack engineering means, and also a lot of kind of concerns. Maybe people who don't understand the role that well, or I don't have so much experience with it. And I thought it's a nice thing to talk about together. So naturally, I came to you, my old mentor from ThoughtWorks University, once again to give me your wisdom. And I guess I'll give like my definition of what full stack engineering is. To me, it's less about working in a bunch of technologies, which is great and good, and I like to do that too. It's more about working in multiple layers. So I'm really interested in being an engineer who can deliver value from end to end, right? Like pick up a vertical story and work on the front end and work on the back end and get the thing all the way to the finish line without having to hand it over halfway through to someone with a different skill set. So to me, that's what full stack engineering is more about. What's your feeling? I can't hear you there. I don't know if you're muted. Oh, connection problem.
No, I'm internet problems. Yeah, welcome to Germany. Germany doesn't have that great of an.
Oh no, disaster. I think we've lost Johannes. Let's give him a minute to try and fix his connection issues.
Okay, can you hear me?
We're back. Go team.
Sorry for the hiccup. Okay, so what I got you saying is, and full stack engineering is about working across multiple layers.
Well, just
Uh,
to me.
yeah, across the interesting things was what are your layers? The layers typically mean whatever your team is covering within their boundary. So if you have a website team, you might have the layer of front end. You have some usability flow logic in the front end. Then you have a back end where you have some business logic. Then you have storage, and then you have the database. And because it needs to run in some kind of infrastructure, you also work on that layer. And that is already quite some tech stack, right?
Mm.
Um, so for me, full stack developer doesn't mean I need to know all these technologies and I need to be an expert in all of them. It's rather the mindset that I'm not afraid to touch anything in any layer. And I might be strong in, let's say, the database layer, but whenever I need to do something in the front end layer, in the view logic, I can talk to my colleague and they help me get the job done. But I can do the work and I'm not handing over the work to the next person.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm still keeping the work. I get their consulting, but then I get the job done. That's for me the definition of a full stack engineer. So it's more a mindset than a skill set to me.
that's a great way to put it, man. Like less about what you are an expert at and more about what you are willing to take responsibility for and try to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, you can get support from people. So let me share with you some of the questions that I've been getting a little bit on LinkedIn. Maybe we can talk about them together because I think they're interesting questions, right? And one of them is, isn't a full stack engineer like a jack of all trades, master of none? And isn't that a bad thing? This is a question that I get a lot. I'm
Hmm.
curious what your thought is.
It can be, right? Like as less like any other concept, you can take it to the absolute extreme. And like, I mean, let me assume you work for Amazon, and if your desire is to work at every piece of Amazon full stack, I don't think you can be a very good developer, because you can only touch the surface, and you have to get consulting for pretty much every line of code you write. So
Mm,
that's not a good way to express full stack. But if
yeah.
you are in a microservices team, or whatever your scope of work is, for all the code this team owns, you should not be afraid to touch it. And a microservice is, like it was defined by our former colleagues, James Lewis, is something which delivers value ideally to the customer, which means you often will have front end, back end, and infrastructure in one service.
Yeah, for sure, man. I guess my feeling was like, of course, specialization can be good, but I wanted to kind of defend the value of generalists a little bit, right? Because I think we've all heard this stuff about like a T-shaped person. So I think, as you said earlier, it's totally possible to be a full stack engineer, but still be, really strong in one area and not so strong in another, right? So I don't think this idea that you just have to be mediocre at everything is really the only way to be a full stack engineer, right? There's lots of ways. But even if you are just sort of okay at everything, even if you are a generalist, I still think that gives you some interesting insight, right? Like if I've only ever driven, take my first car as an old Toyota Corolla, right? If I've only ever driven an old Toyota Corolla, I've never driven a different kind of car, I've never sat in a different kind of car, I've never read about one, I've never seen a photo, right? My only experience of driving is an old Toyota Corolla. Then I don't know what's true about driving compared to what's true about driving an old Corolla, right? Those are the same to me. And I feel like if I drive lots of different cars, well, I start to understand, okay, these are the underlying principles that govern the way a car operates. These are the ways of controlling a car that are more fundamental to driving than the specific details of one car. And I think that probably makes me a better driver. So in the same way, I think like working with a lot of technologies, frameworks, languages has given me access to an understanding of what the fundamental principles governing those things actually look like and how I can get better at them. So maybe if you just do Java for 30 years, suddenly you will achieve a mastery of Java that is perhaps not possible for someone who's doing 10 languages for 30 years. But maybe you'll miss out on learning some really interesting underlying principles that are present in different languages, right? You'll miss out on a lot of nuance that you only notice if you have a broad enough experience to see which things are overlapping and which things are different. To me, that's very valuable as well. And I think a really helpful thing you can bring to a team, right?
Yeah. I think that like the value of understanding technology beyond your immediate scope is kind of
Mm,
common sense, right? Even if you
yeah.
never program anything professionally in Haskell, learning Haskell will get you further, because this language forces you to understand functional programming concepts. So whenever you come back to Java, where you can do some of those concepts, you understand them better because you know how they should work in a purely functional language. So this is the idea of your knowledge pool, and it's like it's almost always bad to have just one language under your belt, um, if you want to become more than like more than an executor, if you want to grow a little bit. Of course, if you just start learning out, it's totally fine to know just one programming language, but you should start to pick up, even if you don't need to know them um, conceptually. What I think is also naturally going to appear. So let's assume you are a very strong Java backend developer, and you say, yes, I want to become a front end full stack engineer. Like, it's a decision you make at some point. I want to become a full stack engineer. So you get hired into a team, probably your company is aware that you're strong in Java and that you contribute the strong Java knowledge to the team. But then you work on a story in the front end, and you need to learn some crazy CSS tricks to make it look bright in Internet Explorer 7 or something like that. And in that moment, you grow your front end knowledge. So once you start on that journey, you will automatically become a more generous person, because whenever your colleague teaches you something, it sticks, right? You won't forget everything after the task is done. So the journey of a full stack engineer is the journey of becoming more generalist.
It's a very nicely put point, man. Maybe the other side of the argument that people will put forward is interesting too. I think I shared that with you earlier. Do you remember?
Probably, but give me the hint.
Okay, this is like okay, so maybe I've defended the role of generalists a little bit, right? So we can say, okay, there's some value in writing some JavaScript, even if you're not great at writing JavaScript yet, right?
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be more efficient to be a specialist? Like if I have a story, it has some JavaScript front end, some Java back end. Isn't it more efficient if a JavaScript expert writes the JavaScript and then a Java expert writes the Java, and we just put them together at the end? Like, why would I want someone who's not great at writing JavaScript to write my JavaScript?
Well, so in general, if you live in a perfect world where handovers work perfectly, you're right. Yeah. I've never seen teams where handoffs worked perfectly.
Yeah.
That's not to say they don't exist, but I would go as far to say that they are very, very rare. So usually you want to have a business feature, and this goes between front end, back end, database. Some features might not hit all layers, but generally speaking, there will be features that hit all layers. Otherwise, they're not connected. And whenever you do that, there is a certain amount of thinking about the whole feature because someone thought about it. And if you work in specialists, you do the front end, then you give it to the back end people, and the back end people say like, that's a weird call. We need to refactor that API. Let's change it a little bit. And then you give it to the database people, and the database people say, we can't store it this way in the database. It's a relational database. We have to change it again. So you have this back and forth all the time. And of course, I've never seen a team which was as specialist as this, that they literally hand over the work and then, I don't know, go away on a holiday and come back expecting that it's done, right? So we are anyway a little bit full stack when we play into each other's territories, even by talking about this stuff, not by programming. And full stack engineer is just one step more. Let me sit together with the backend engineer and work on that backend thing, even if I'm a front end engineer.
Yeah, for sure, man. I agree completely. It's a beautiful way to put it, right? Then we're a little bit full stack already just by having the conversation. So it's really just a matter of degrees. How far do you want to take that? Do you want to go a little further than the conversation and sit together, or maybe go a little further and change which one of you is actually doing the typing?
Yeah, but there's an interesting thing. Like if you want to be like if you want to cut your being full stack at a layer, then you build a public API. So whoever builds the Twitter API will rarely talk with the people, or will probably not talk with most of the people building front ends for that API. So there you have a clear cut, a clear API. And it makes sense because like if the developers of the Twitter API would talk to all the front-end developers, they would do nothing else, right? Because there are so many front ends. So sometimes there's value in cutting and specifying the API very clearly. But if you just have one consumer of your API, this is a lot of waste of time.
Yeah. I think like this comes to one of the points I think is important here, right? And it is something like value ownership. Like if I'm doing something, I'm programming, I want the thing I'm doing to have value. I want it to mean something to somebody's life. And if I'm making a front end change, but I have no involvement in the corresponding and required API change, or I'm making an API change, but I'm not involved in the front end change that's going to consume that API, and it's not a public API, right? Um, or I'm making some database change, but I'm not involved in the rest of the story. Like I don't really own a piece of value, right? I'm not trying to deliver something to a real person that makes their life better. So for me, a lot of the value in being willing to write some JavaScript, even if I'm not amazing at JavaScript, or write some Java if I'm not amazing at Java, being able to follow the delivery of that value through the different layers of the stack is that I can own that piece of value I'm trying to deliver, right? I can connect everything I'm doing to some outcome for real people, which to me is very important. I don't want to just meet requirements and check boxes. I want my work to change somebody's life in some way, even just a little way, make it a little bit better, a little bit easier. And by working across multiple layers, I can keep that connection, right? Everything I'm doing is connected to this user outcome. So to me, that's really nice, and I think that's a big intangible cost of everyone being really specialized. If I can only work on front end tasks, or I can only work on back end tasks, then a lot of the time I'm not going to be able to connect what I'm doing to meaningfully creating some outcome for my users. That makes me feel not so motivated. I think there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
I have another question that comes up a little bit. I heard this one in Australia a lot. I think this is like different countries have different ideas, right, about what full stack engineering is, and different attitudes about it. And when I heard in Australia a bit is, aren't we expecting too much from engineers? Like we'd have a lot of roles advertised. It's like, oh, I want someone with 2 years experience, full stack, and they would describe a pretty complicated stack. And I guess some engineers in Australia have looked at that and gone, oh, that looks like a lot to expect. That's very unfair. So I'm curious your feeling about that.
Yes. Like, I mean, to be honest, like when I started programming, like the JavaScript we wrote were a couple of lines. Like nobody even expected whole applications in there. And when I look, even if you just want to be a pro in front end development these days, you come in, you need to learn JavaScript, you need to learn HTML. But HTML is no longer cool. You don't want to write it directly. So you
No.
also need to learn Puck or whatever preprocessor. You need to learn Webpack. Webpack is insanely complex. You
Yeah.
need to learn CSS. And of course, because CSS is no longer cool, you need to learn Sass. You need to learn Vue.js or React and the build system of it. And I don't know, but count how many languages you need to know when you want to be a front end developer. So yes, we are expecting too much from the people, and for me and for you maybe as well, it's okay because you started to learn HTML and then you said, yeah, I want to have a little bit dynamicity, and I learned JavaScript, and then I learned that um, that styling your HTML by HTML tags is not a good thing. So I learned CSS, and then CSS grew, and you said like, I need something better. I learned Sass. So you grew with the stack over time. But if you join today, even if you just want to be a good front end developer, like I don't envy the people finishing university today, honestly. But the only way you can somehow navigate this is if you have colleagues who help you and who don't say, "Hmm, well, that's your thing because you're a front end dev and I'm a back end dev, so I'm not
Yeah.
going to help you." So, the essence of being a full stack developer is that you're part of a full stack team and help each other, and that you can go over these requirements And talking to the job ads, if you expect someone to be expert in everything,
Yeah.
well, that's unfair. I would definitely sign that. And I would also say they probably don't find anyone they hire.
Or they just hire people who say they are an expert in everything, right? Even worse outcome, maybe. Yeah,
Well,
I
they
think.
tend to hire people who claim they can learn everything, which
Yeah,
is a similar but quite different statement.
yeah. I really like your point about to be a full stack engineer, you have to be on a full stack kind of team, right? A team that has that mentality and that culture. So I think maybe this question comes from people who have been on who are on a team of specialists, and they think about the culture of their team, and then they imagine, what if my job was to work in every part of, in every role that my team has, and they're not in that environment where people do cross role pairing, where people are not afraid to ask dumb questions, where people help each other really actively. So the prospect of having to work in these different technologies is scary. It feels like a demand. But I think it's up to us to create a team culture and an environment where people can take that on as like an opportunity to learn, instead of as this really unreasonable demand, right? Instead of saying, hey, you have to be an expert at everything to work here. We're trying to say, well, you should probably be good at something that we do, like some part of our tech stack. You should probably be proficient at. But for the other stuff, we just want you to be interested and willing to take it on. And then our responsibility is to create an environment where we can support you in learning that, give you those opportunities, and make sure it's safe for you to ask those questions. You're not going to feel judged, or not going to feel like you were supposed to know something already. So I think it's very unfair if we expect everyone to be an expert on everything. But for sure we don't, right? Like, we're hiring for this role now at SadaPay, and our like little list of requirements in the job description is that you should be strong in one part of our tech stack, and you should be interested in another part of our tech stack.
Yeah.
And then it's our job to give you the opportunity to learn that, because we think is valuable for the organization and valuable for you.
Yeah. Like, that's the whole point. You will always have a stronger suit somewhere, right? So there isn't no one has 25% JavaScript, 25% CSS, 25% Java, and 25% Postgres, right? So that you will have something which interests you more, which you have worked more, something you are better at, and that's where you give the information to your colleagues, and something where you need to take the information from the colleague, and that's fine. And I also want to make a point of that companies have a responsibility to make sure the scope of the team is compact enough to be able to do that, because I mentioned it in the Amazon example, and Amazon doesn't have one team, right? They have a lot of teams, and it's the job of Amazon to make sure that people can be a full stack developer in their team. So there will be still teams who never touch the web front end. There will be teams who do an iOS application, and full stack developers in those teams will look significantly different. Sorry,
Yeah.
significantly different than they do if you have a website team, and that's fine. Some people need to work with the content management system. Some people don't. So full stack is rather covering everything in a team than covering everything my organization does.
I like
And
that team-specific way of putting it, right? Like, that sort of suits my idea of full stack, that you can own the delivery of some value end to end. Sort of adds, like, as framed by your team, like whatever your team thinks its value is, you can own a piece of that end to end within your team.
yeah, and of course the company should then not build a website front end and an iOS front end team and a iOS backend team and a website backend team, because then the teams are not full stack.
Yeah, and that's like a natural, like, SadaPay is growing quite quickly, right? And we had the one core engineering team, and as it grew, it naturally began, like people began to divide themselves into like, okay, we're the iOS team, we're the Android team, like it just kind of started to evolve. And it was up to us as an organization to go, whoa, 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 those aren't the lines we want to draw, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
draw lines around areas of value so that people can just be engineers and work on different things.
Yeah. Although I have to say, especially Android and iOS make it, in my opinion, pretty difficult to build full stack teams, because there's no good way to not build your iOS or Android application as a monolith. Because I mean, with the web stack, it's awesome. You can have an order team, you can have a checkout team, you can have an article detail team and a search team, and they all deliver HTML, and like you connect them together with a CDN or whatever you choose, and that's awesome. But there's no possibility to do that with iOS and Android, and I think that's a weakness of those platforms, and they should be thinking about fixing that.
Yeah, I've thought a bit about how mobile applications are like the last stand of the monolith in software engineering. But there is some cool stuff going on, like with all these super apps being built. There's some interesting approaches to modularization. Maybe we can get one of our iOS engineers, Shoab, to come on one of these, because he's doing some really interesting work on modularizing the iOS app. I wonder if he thinks it could be split across multiple teams with that approach. Maybe. I think
maybe that's a solution. And to be honest, I'm not an expert in native apps, so I don't know
yeah.
technologies. But I think this is something that the platform should provide, because companies have that issues.
Yeah, in web, Cam Jackson at ThoughtWorks put a lot of work into micro front ends. So trying to take monolithic front end apps and be able to split them into separate, discrete pieces ownable by different teams. I think we have to do like a Q&A now, because we're low on time, and I think that's the last phase. Assad is organizing that for us now, I think. Just gonna wait 1 second. Oh, hang on. Are those questions?
Okay. Thoughts about full stack designers who get involved at every stage of user experience design process, from research to implement. Do you also call it a full stack engineer?
How cool is that question? So this is cool. I know Basit, he's a designer. It's a very good question, right? So he's involved in the whole development lifecycle. Is he a full stack designer?
We don't have the full stack institute. You can call yourself full stack designer. You have my permission.
I think it's cool, right? Like, because he could, if he wanted to, right? He could easily find an organization where he just does a nice design and throws it over a fence and never thinks about it or talks to anyone about it ever again. Like, there are many companies that treat design that way.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. Like, he's choosing to get involved in every phase of delivery, and yeah, it sounds pretty full stack to me, right? Like, he's owning the value, not just one layer of the process. I really like this idea of expanding the layers to include pre-development work.
Yeah, the moment where you talk about the speed of your database queries as a usability feature, you know that you're in that territory, right?
It's a great point, man. Yeah, and like if that's not usability, what is, right? If you're interested in user experience, of course you should care about response time.
What are your thoughts about the MERN and the mean stack? So mean, what is mean? Mongo. It's hard because I don't know the acronyms.
I guess MERN is mostly like Mongo React Node. So maybe mean is Mongo Angular Node. I'm just guessing. But I'm seeing a lot of MERN stack stuff, right? A lot of people, particularly like younger applicants with experience in the MERN stack. It's kind of interesting for me, because I guess we've been in software a little while, and I definitely saw like the rise and what seemed to be the fall of Mongo. Like, a lot of companies very interested in adopting it, especially for rapid prototyping.
Yeah. So Mongo Express Angular Node. Yeah. And the other one is then Mongo Express and React Node. So this is ultimately a discussion. What do we think between Angular and React? I think that's a whole new show.
Yeah, what do you think of these stacks? Maybe not compared to each other. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I like object stores. Like I'm very interested in MongoDB and things like that. But it did seem like they saw broad adoption for a while, and then they saw like a fall off of interest. And I'm not sure how much the growth in this stack at the moment is driven by like actual demand in industry versus like there's just a lot of boot camps at the moment that are teaching the MERN stack because it's a very approachable way to learn about many interesting things.
Because I mean, what these stacks provide is they reduce the number of languages you need to learn, right? I mean, I built an application some time ago with Mongo, Java, Angular, and some Nashorn instead of Node. So we had some shared code, and then it would run on the JVM in the Nashorn engine, which is now deprecated. And yes, I mean, we could have built that application in Node. We didn't because of circumstances with our client, and it was fine. But yes, if you have one less language to learn, that is obviously a faster input. And if you want to keep your stack tight, that might be a good choice. On the other hand, learning one more language is also not the biggest thing for an engineer. Like switching from JavaScript to Java. Of course, you go with a total different mindset. The syntax is very similar, but mindset is totally different. But yeah, there are good reasons for both. Let's keep it like that.
Yeah, maybe you would have to do another show about like polyglot environments versus non-polyglot environments. That would be like the real topic. Our last question, I think. Are platforms or courses?
Learning platform or courses you guys would recommend for Pakistani engineers to learn full stack development?
I'll let you start.
I don't know. I don't know good learning platforms, to be honest, because when I learned this stuff, there were no learning platforms, and I did it over a long period of time. And as I said, I have huge sympathies for people having trouble picking all of this stuff up at once that I learned over decades. Decades, yeah. Scary.
Yeah, I have like my kind of journey. Like when I started software engineering, that was at ThoughtWorks in Australia. And we didn't have a kind of development that was not full stack engineering, right? We were just developers. And as far as I knew at that time, and for a couple of years, that's what being a developer was. You just pick up whatever technology you need to learn, whatever tools, and you figure it out, you add value. It was, I think, 2 years into my career before I encountered anyone who was like, oh no, I'm not this kind of engineer. I don't do that kind of task. So it was, it was the default. It was the only thing we were doing. So it's a bit different. Now I work with many people who see themselves as specialists, and the question like, how do I learn full stack engineering? It's kind of strange to me. I think you learn some skill like you've already learned probably, and then you learn another one, right? And then you learn another one, and it's just about not getting to that point where you say, no, I don't do that. Instead of saying, no, I don't do that, I'm not that kind of engineer, you just keep going and learn something else. I think it's very unreasonable to expect you to do that entirely on your own. I think it helps a lot if you have an employer that supports you in that. I think you need that opportunity. If you're working somewhere where they just want you to do the thing you're already expert at, then you're stuck having to master a second technology at home after hours, and that's very difficult. So I think there's a responsibility for me to try and nurture an environment where people have the opportunity to learn new things and do things they're not good at yet. So I think that's a big part of learning, right? Is just being somewhere where you are free to take on a new challenge and free to fail and just be bad at it for a little while you're learning and get that support from your colleagues.
Yeah.
So
And
this is more useful than a book or a learning platform or a course is to learn as you go.
yeah, learn as you go, and like and remember, like full stack is like depends on your context, right? So if you have a pet project, I have a website. I'm the the full stack engineer for that website because no one else works on it. So I have to do the front end, the back end, which is non-existing, and the infrastructure. So that is already full stack, although it's a very small thing. And then when you have a small full stack, maybe you grow to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. So it's a matter of starting in, maybe it was a pet project if you're a student, that you can completely deliver everything yourself, and then you grow from there. You add a thing, you find out, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a comments feature, and then you build a backend.
Yeah, I think this question comes back to your point earlier, right? When you said full stack engineering is like more of a mindset than a skill set.
Yeah.
So this, to me, like looking for a course is not the way that I think about it, right? I think we've got a few different questions rotating through. I'm not sure what happened, Assad.
How do you see developers from Pakistan in coming years? You have to answer that because I have no clue.
I'm not sure. I see some really great things happening. Like there are some really cool tech companies in Pakistan. The practices coming out of them are quite strong. I think the relationship between product engineering at many companies is not as mature as I would like it to be. So that's something we're trying to improve on at SadaPay. But yeah, things look really promising. People are learning a lot of good practices, and we're hoping to take that even further at SadaPay. But the amount of young talent and the fact that there are tech companies now that are really doing things in a pretty good way, maybe not my ideal way, but using lots of good practices and giving people a good working environments, I think the future looks very promising to me. So we're already successful at hiring really talented people in Pakistan. I think it will continue to get easier, and we'll try to do what we can to improve the talent pool further, right, by providing people more learning opportunities. I thought this was an interesting question as well. Do you want to have a shot at this, Johannes?
Combination stack like front end in React with Java backend as a backend. What are your thoughts on that? Because both possess a bit different approach to programming. Yeah. So yeah, the programming approach between React and a Java backend, let's say a Java Spring backend, because like at least I feel like 90% of Java's backends are with Spring. They are very, very different. On the other hand, Express also works very differently than React. So it's not as extreme as you might think. But yes, they are very, very different. And I would say if you have no good reason, choose Express. But if you have a good reason, there are possibilities to choose Java because Java has certain properties that are beneficial. Like knowledge is a big factor. Like in the real world, it is like you sometimes have companies with lots and lots of people experience with running Java programs, tuning Java programs, debugging them, monitoring them in production, and you don't have that experience with Express yet, and that might be a good reason to stick with Java, even if on the building side it might be not as smooth as Express.
Yeah.
Of course, you can have the discussion, should we build up that and should that be a strategic investment? But this is a conversation you then need to have. And it is a valid point that we know Java better in operations.
Yeah, this is to me like another question that is polyglot versus what's the opposite of polyglot? Monoglot? I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
we're proposing like, okay, compare an environment where everything is in one language versus where things are in radically different languages. To me, this is a difficult question, depends on many considerations. But I do think there's some value in the variety as well. Like the fact that Java is a fundamentally different way of programming than JavaScript. Like it requires a slightly different mindset. I think that can be a challenge, but it can also be a strength, right? Because it means if I'm doing both, I'm getting a pretty diverse experience and probably learning some really interesting things about the fundamentals of software development. Like for me, I think a lot about, because I'm good at both of those languages, right? I've worked a lot in Java and in JavaScript. And JavaScript for me, as someone obsessed with software quality and test-driven development, there's a lot that has to happen at runtime, right? Because it's an interpreted language. And when I was just writing JavaScript, that wasn't really interesting to me, right? I didn't realize how much my approach to writing JavaScript depended on getting really fast runtime feedback on whether my code was actually working right now. And then getting some experience in Java, it was interesting to learn, okay, here we're relying a little less on runtime and we're trying to do a lot more at compile time, right? We have really powerful tools for evaluating the correctness of our code before we run it. And that changes our approach to testing a little bit. It changes the way we write code because it's more geared towards writing code that will fail at compile time if it's going to fail, rather than waiting until it fails at runtime. Like this distinction is very interesting, right? And taught me a lot about software development and made me think about things in a different way. And it's because they're different that they can teach me something really fundamental by the way that they're different and the way that they're similar. So to me is kind of a great opportunity, right? Maybe you have to learn a different mindset, but knowing two really different mindsets is a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Learning a different mindset. And so I think there is the interesting thing about Java. So my team, I think yesterday switched off an old Java monolith written in WebSphere, and they rewrote the thing to work with Spring, and this was Java 6. So Java from 10 years ago, probably even more than 10 years ago, and now it's running in Java 11. Think about this in JavaScript. A JavaScript application written 11 years ago, try to modernize it. This is like, this doesn't take 3 months. This takes 3 years. Yeah. You like throw it away, write it again. And like Java is not as modern as some of the stuff you can do in JavaScript, but you know that your code will run in 3 years. I give you another example of a client from a JavaScript perspective. So we had a client and we built something for 2 years and they were happy about it. And so we left and they used the software and they kept using the software. And I've heard 2 or 3 years ago, they came back and said like, hey, we would like you to write a new feature to this software. This was 5 years later. The software was initially written in Angular 1. What do? The client just wants to have a new feature. Do you want to rewrite the whole application, which took you 2 years to write, just to add a new feature? This is the issue with JavaScript, because you cannot have the code lying around. You have to update it over and over again. And sometimes in some areas, you don't want to do that.
Yeah. I think Asad is telling me we are out of time, and I have to say goodbye to everybody. And there are no more.
We shouldn't finish on a Java versus JavaScript discussion. And I think we both love both languages and see the advantages, but also the disadvantages of both.
Well, what I'm trying to make a pitch for is like, don't see that, oh, I have to work in 2 languages and they're so different. This is a real pain. Why couldn't we just use one language? Maybe that's true sometimes, and you should have used one language. But I think you don't have to see it just as a difficulty to overcome, right? I think it's a great opportunity, because having a broad experience and trying different things will teach you a lot about the principles that underlie both.
Yeah. So don't use 2 languages just because you want to be a full stack. Like if you use 2 different languages, you should have a good reason for it.
But if you're in that environment now, like, see it as the great learning opportunity that it is. I think I learned a lot that way.
Yeah. And
Cool.
I think full stack gives you the power to understand your whole team and deliver values on all sides. And this is a cool thing, especially because your dimensions of learning are multiple ways. You don't only learn in one direction, you learn in multiple ones. And this is a cool thing, and you can create better software that way.
Yeah, and for me, maybe the best thing is that it turns you from someone whose job is to deliver code into someone whose job is to deliver value, right? Because you can own the whole process, at least within the bounded context of what your team sees as value.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So goodbye, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening. This was my first like live video thing. And Johannes, you've done a lot of podcasting, but I think this is your first video as well.
This is my first video, yeah, and you see why I'm not doing that, because sometimes Germany has internet issues.
Thanks everyone for listening and giving us this chance to do this for the first time. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.